You know that story of creation, the one we've all heard? Well, what if I told you that it isn't the original story? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty controversial theory, all based on the work of Zecharia Sitchin. We're re-examining our own origin story, but not through the Bible. Nope, we're going back to much, much older texts that paint a very, very different picture of how humanity began.
It all kicks off with a really strange question, one that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time, right in the very first book of the Bible. A question about who exactly was in the room when humanity was created.
And boom, there it is, the plural pronouns, us and our. Now, for centuries, people have come up with all sorts of explanations for this, but the question just won't go away. What if it's not symbolic? What if God wasn't talking to himself? What if it was a real conversation? That one little question, well, it's the key that unlocks this entire story. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with those weird puzzles right there in Genesis. Then we're going to jump back in time to ancient Sumeria, which leads to this wild idea about gods from another planet. And that will help us understand why humanity was really created according to this theory, and what really went down in the Garden of Eden.
Okay, so first up, let's stick with the text we all think we know and some of the clues that suggest, there might be more going on.
When you start to string these clues together, the whole picture starts to shift. First off, the Hebrew word for God, Elohim, is actually plural. It means the divine ones. Then you have God walking around in the garden. That's a physical act. And then there's this really bizarre moment of worry, this fear that humans have become like one of us. That just doesn't sound like a single, all-powerful creator. It sounds more like a board of directors getting nervous that their project is about to go rogue.
And this, right here, is where the story takes a massive turn. Because it turns out, the Genesis account, it's not the original version of this story.
And this is the absolute key to this whole theory. Long, long before the Bible was ever written down, a whole other civilization had already carved a startlingly similar and way more detailed version of creation onto stone tablets.
And the time difference here is just staggering. We're not talking a few decades. We are talking about a gap of nearly 3,000 years. The Sumerians, in what's now Iraq, were recording their stories on clay tablets millennia before Genesis was even a rough draft.
So, what did the Sumerians call their gods? The Anunnaki. And the meaning of that name is just incredibly direct. So when the authors of Genesis used the plural word Elohim, were they actually talking about the beings the Sumerians had been writing about for thousands of years?
According to those Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki weren't just some spirits in the sky. No, they were physical beings, and they came to Earth for a very specific reason.
Sitchin's interpretation of these ancient tablets lays it all out. They came from a planet called Nibiru, which had this huge 3,600-year orbit that would swing it into our solar system. Their mission? To mine gold. A lot of it. Not for treasure, but to create a shield for their own planet's failing atmosphere. The expedition was run by two half-brothers, Enki, the brilliant chief scientist, and Enlil, the by-the-book commander.
And that number, 3,600 Earth years, is a huge deal. That's one Nibiru year, what they called a shar. So for the Anunnaki, a 10-year mission would be 36,000 years for us. This one detail suddenly explains the incredible lifespans of the gods in all these ancient texts. From our point of view, they were basically immortal.
So, if these beings came here to mine gold, where do we fit in? Well, the story goes that after a very, very long time of hard labor, the Anunnaki miners, they've had enough.
They had a full-blown rebellion on their hands. The working-class Anunnaki burned their tools and surrounded the commander Enlil's compound. The entire gold mining operation was about to collapse. They needed a new source of labor, and they needed it fast.
This is when Enki, the scientist, comes up with this totally radical solution. He basically says, don't create a worker from scratch, let's just take the creature that's already evolved on this planet and upgrade it. According to the tablets, they combined their own genes with the egg of a female hominid. They implanted that into an Anunnaki surrogate, and the first successful prototype was born. They called him Adumu, which means the Earthling.
The texts even record the triumphant shout of the chief medical officer, a goddess named Ninmah, as she held up the newborn. It's not presented as some magical act, but as this monumental, successful biological experiment.
So, this completely flips the script on the Garden of Eden. In this version, it wasn't a paradise for humans to just relax in, it was basically an Anunnaki settlement, their Eden, in Mesopotamia, and we were there to do the work.
But there was a catch. Like a lot of hybrids, the first humans were sterile. This gave the Anunnaki complete control over their workforce. But one of the gods, he felt that this was a limitation that needed to be, corrected.
Okay, let's look at the serpent. In the traditional story, he's the ultimate bad guy, right? The source of all evil. But in this interpretation, the serpent isn't a snake. It's a symbol for the scientist god Enki. He wasn't tempting humanity with evil. He was trying to liberate us with knowledge.
So here's the absolute bombshell of the theory. The forbidden fruit wasn't an apple. It was the genetic knowledge of how to procreate. Enki, going against his brother Enlil's direct orders, supposedly did a second round of genetic engineering to make humans self-sufficient. And get this, Enki's symbol was two intertwined serpents, which we still associate with medicine today. It looks uncannily like the double helix structure of DNA. So the fall of man wasn't a punishment for sin, it was the commander Enlil's furious rage when he found out his workforce could suddenly reproduce on its own.
And so humanity was kicked out of the gods' compound. We got knowledge, we got independence, but we were denied the final prize, the extreme longevity of the Anunnaki, what the Bible calls the tree of life. We were finally on our own. What this ancient interpretation really suggests is something, well, profound. If the Elohim of Genesis were actually the Anunnaki of Sumer, it means our creation wasn't just about dust and divinity. It means that we, humanity, have an extraterrestrial heritage. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. As we build our own spaceships and look up at the stars, are we really just exploring a new frontier? Or are we, just maybe, trying to find our way back home?